Welcome to What About Self-Directed Education?
Today my guest is Clements from South Africa.
Hi, great to be here, Matt.
We are talking today a little bit about self-directed education, of course, as I always do. And especially we talk about a book you wrote, What If School Creates Dyslexia? Yeah, maybe we could start how did you come across SDE?
Wow, now that's a long story. I'll try and get it shorter. I started becoming aware of kids and their wisdom before I started becoming aware that there was such a thing as SDE. So I was actually working in the field of children's participation in environmental rights, and I was running workshops for hundreds of kids to get their input on how municipal money could be spent in their areas. For example, they would do drawings of their walk home and map out where the danger spots were for them in terms of drunk adults outside bars or railways that were not fenced. And I was really struck by the quality of their input was amazing. And the way that the adults treated their input as token, they would have a presentation where the kids would show their work and the adults would pat them on the head and give them a biscuit, and nothing would happen after that. That was very startling for me. That was a big wake-up call. And then secondly, although we weren't talking about school, they talked about school all the time. And I didn't hear a single positive comment. And this was in 2 different provinces, ranging from street child shelter schools to some of the top, most expensive private schools and everything in between. And I had this aha that it wasn't me. It wasn't that I didn't fit into school. Maybe there was something wrong with school itself. If this many kids who were this bright and awake and aware and so full of wisdom were hating school, what was going on? So that was already in place for me when I became a mother. And then I started a reading group to look into alternative education when my son was just a couple of months old, because I was like, okay, he's not going to a mainstream school. Is it going to be Waldorf or is it going to be Montessori? So I started this reading group, and the more I read, the more unhappy I became because of my background in children's rights and their right to be heard in decisions that affect them. And what I was seeing in both Waldorf and Montessori was, again, adults basically imposing adult ideas of education on children. So then I registered for a master's in education philosophy with the plan to develop my own educational model. And I quickly discovered that I was being told again what I would read, what I would say, what I would cover and what I would not cover. And it wasn't going anywhere in the direction I needed it to go. So I left and I didn't know what I was going to do. And in the meantime, my son was a toddler. He was about 1 year old now. And I started taking him to a nursery school that had an open afternoon. Obviously, their idea was recruitment, that you come with these tiny toddlers just to use the playground and play with some face paint or finger paint. And then eventually you'll sign up for their nursery school. But it was really like a social for mums and toddlers. And there I met a family of unschoolers. And their children were a little bit older than mine. The younger one was 9 months older than my son, and the older one was a few years older. And we started to talk. And I thought they were nuts, completely crazy. I couldn't understand what their thinking was. But we quickly established enough of a common ground that we decided to open something together on a friend's plot. Just a very small group for little kids. And we hired a Montessori teacher and we said, don't teach the kids anything unless they've asked. And this other mum that I'd met was paranoid that her kids were going to get taught against their will. And I was like, what is your problem? What is so terrible about your kids getting taught something against their will? But that was the start of the journey for me. that project only lasted a year, but by then I was completely hooked into finding out everything that I could. So then I got onto the internet. It was still in its infancy then, but I could still find some resources, find some people to talk to. And it wasn't actually until I read Free at Last, I think was maybe the first book from Sudbury Valley School, that I suddenly had this aha that I don't have to invent anything. I just have to take these principles and implement them in South Africa, because finally here's something that sees young people as full human beings. Here's finally a form of education that recognizes their power and their wisdom and simply supports that instead of trying to override it. So that's a long story, but I was so excited when I found that. And then, of course, there was still a number of years that went by before we started Riverstone Village. But basically, my son ended up self-directing his education his whole life, because by the time he was old enough for me to really interfere, I'd already stopped interfering. Do you ever stop interfering? I'd already learned to try and not interfere. And I was also just very, very fortunate with him because he's a very strong-willed person. So, anytime I started to get in his way, he would let me know. And it was just amazing to watch his learning develop and unfold. And that really is what convinced me completely that we were on the right track, was just watching what he actually did with his time.
You mentioned Riverstone for people that don't know you yet. So Riverstone is a Sudbury Valley School in South Africa that you co-founded.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
How many years was that ago?
It's about 3.5 now. It's heading for 4, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
And before that, we had, my main co-founder is that same mother that I met when my son was 1. So, we really had a long journey together. We've had sort of 15 years almost now, working on one project and another.
So until Riverstone existed, your son was actually then also unschooling, or?
Yes. Yeah. He was unschooling. At one point, we moved to a house that was a little far from his friends when he was 2, going 3, when that first project ended after a year. And so I decided to try and find the smallest, most child-friendly little nursery school nearby that he could go for an afternoon or 2 a week. And I found this little tiny one in somebody's back garden where they would allow him to come just, when he wanted to. And he loved it for 2 whole weeks because they had different toys and different kids. And after that, he became very frustrated. It's like, why will they not let me climb the tree? Why do I have to draw a bunny? Why do I have to have a nap now? Why do I have to eat mashed potato? So he got tired of that very, very quickly. That was his only experience with anything else.
That's interesting. Maybe I would guess that he knew, I have the freedom to do it differently, so I can even question that. I don't have to go. Probably that made it easier for him to tell you no, but all these questions, or to ask why do I have to do this? And
although I think his genes have a lot to do with it, because he has 2 very strong-willed parents, and we've got a lovely story from even just before that time where I was still trying to do what I thought I was supposed to do as a mother. I can't remember what I was trying to make him do, but I was getting very frustrated and said to him, "Why aren't you listening to me?" And cool as anything, he said, "I am listening. I'm just not obeying."
Yeah. So that's a very good answer.
So he kept me on track all the way. Yeah.
So the motivation to found Riverstone was not actually that you had a need for your own personal life, for your son, but it was much more.
Yes, much more. My son actually believed that he would be perfectly happy unschooling at home. He's more of an introvert. He was perfectly happy with the couple of friends that he had, to see them once or twice a week. Although since we've opened, he's repeatedly thanked me, because he's found a lot of extra resources and experiences that he wouldn't have otherwise had. So that's been very, very interesting to actually see how much it's added to his life. It was something that I needed to do for myself. It almost, as an extension of the work that I used to do. I needed to do something to make this possible. I mean, there was no Sudbury-inspired facility in Africa. It's like, how can that be? That's not okay. We want one on every corner, walking distance from every house. And then my daughter was actually the one who really made it urgent because she's very social. I ended up having to take her to a Reggio Emilia-inspired nursery school at least a couple of days a week because she was just craving that social interaction with more kids and more things to do. I mean, her average activity at that age lasted about 10 to 15 minutes, and then she wanted a different one. So very, very busy person. And she again became frustrated, although it was the loveliest, most child-friendly, awesome place you can imagine outside of SDE proper. She was still like, okay, so because 5 of the kids were interested in space, now we're doing space. I don't want to do space, and I don't want to do story time now, and I want to eat lunch later. And she was hitting up against those same problems, even in that kind of space that most people would consider completely ideal. So I tried running play dates at my house for groups of kids multiple times a week, and I tried running a once-a-week event in the bowling hall where I would just fill my car full of toys and musical instruments and books and Play-Doh. And, all of those were nice, but there's nothing like, I mean, now I really understand, now that I understand the optimizing conditions for self-directed education, that immersion in a stable, supportive, respectful community. That is just such an additional dimension that brings so much richness. And yeah, I really do wish that for every child. Ultimately, I think what we would love is if we didn't have to have any facilities at all. If the whole of our city, for example, could become a space where the children could free range and be respected and interface wherever they went. But in the meantime, this is what we've got. So creating at least this micro environment, this kind of sanctuary where the kids can come and be themselves is very, very important to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really a big need. Yeah, if I remember also for myself, when I look back for my daughter, she also that was always something she craved for, that there is a community and where you are not judged by mainstream standard ideas of how school should look like. And yes, it would be an ideal situation when simply the community we are actually living in would be such a place. But yeah, for some reason, our society opted to drift away. And I would actually argue that there is no real community. You have like small communities inside of, but like a bigger community, especially for where young people are free to explore and make relations that they would like, or explore interests that they have. Yeah, we are kind of in a state where it's most of the time it's very artificial.
Yeah.
In my region around me, there is no such a place like Riverstone, and it's really something that is missing. Also to have like a place where you can experience SDE and don't have to have the feeling that you are completely alone, that you have to invent everything, that you have to build everything, like in unschooling. So I remember for me, the experience was similar, that we had to organize everything and we had to go, and we drove like 4 hours just to meet with people that have a similar idea. And so that my daughter could like meet her friends that could be like 6 hours away or something like that.
Yeah.
and then you have to organize like festivals, like weekends, and that's also a dimension I would say that is also important. Everything is connecting. I have the feeling that everything is connecting much more nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
I think because 15 years ago or 10 years ago, it was a lot emptier, I would say. At least in my region, you have of course, you have places like Summerhill or Sudbury Valley that are existing already for a long time. But if you are not living where these communities already are, it's it's different. Then you started writing these books about and giving workshops about facilitating self-directed education. So you discovered it for yourself, but you decided at a point, so I want to help other people discover this and maybe also facilitate their how should I say, their way into this idea or make them familiar. How came that about? Is this also the need to, came that also from the need of connecting with people, or?
Well, when we started Riverstone, we wanted to do some staff training and we couldn't find any. The only advice was, read until your eyes fall out. And not everybody is built to read until their eyes fall out. I read my way through almost the entire Sudbury Valley School starter kit, but even I did not complete reading every single word in that pack. It's too much. So we had to kind of create our own staff training. And because I'd already been training other adults as facilitators in my previous work with the kids in those workshops, we obviously had many facilitators, and I would design the workshop. I would train the people to run it. So I already had that experience. And I've always been a writer. I've made my money over the years doing various kinds of report writing or policy writing or, whatever kinds of writing. So it was natural for me to start writing material to support what we were trying to learn and to articulate my ideas. This is a very central part of self-directed education, is that we learn by teaching because we consolidate and articulate what we know when we transmit it to somebody else. So it was a very natural way for me to consolidate my own learning and then also be able to share it more easily. And then because we hadn't found it online or from overseas, I also realized that this was an international need. I can't really remember how it started becoming more and more open, but it suddenly started being not just South Africans on my calls. Because I was already working with people in other places in South Africa. We were on Discord. And then suddenly it wasn't only in South Africa. And then I started realizing that I'd written this module and I'd written that module, and that I could put them together into a book, link them together into a book. And then I started realizing that there was this gap, that there's lots of books on the experience of self-directed education. There's many, many wonderful stories about real life experiences and anecdotes. And there's not a lot of theory that really grapples with the concepts underneath. And that's what I was finding, is that what was taking the time was for people to read all of these stories, these beautiful stories, but then extract the ideas from those stories for themselves was very, very slow. I realized that one of the things that I'm good at is actually distilling the idea or the core concept out of something and articulating it in a more theoretical way, which doesn't work for everybody. But for some of us, it's really useful. Kind of gives us a fast track to the ideas to be able to actually map them out and articulate them and say, this is why it works and this is what's going on. Here's the dynamic. And now I'm kind of addicted to doing that, honestly, because it's just such a fascinating field. I'm now writing the materials that I really wanted when I signed up for that Master's in Education Philosophy that I couldn't access and I couldn't find. I'm now creating them. And it's become something I can hardly keep up with. I can't find enough writing time for all of the insights I'm having all the time from these kids. They're just amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Like having the experience of unschooling, of self-directed education, I can imagine like now that you have like Riverstone, you have like, you are immersed in all this experience of all these individuals that are coming there, that are forming this community and living self-directed education. And then again, like connecting it to the puzzle of the philosophical ideas behind it, and also the educational beliefs, also the dogmas that are out there, like contrasting it. So for me, reading your books, it was really a revelation of, wow, finally there is someone that is putting this into a context, like a puzzle. And taking these abstract ideas that are really hard, or at least for me, were much harder to get my head around, because they are like abstract. They are experiences of other people that I didn't make. Probably it was also because of my background of having studied pedagogy. It was like, oh, okay, but now I have like this piece that was missing, that was linking what I recognized in all this educational theory that is out there, where I myself, in my experience, realized, but there's something wrong here. That it is not. There's something missing here. And then came the work of Peter Gray, and I read the work of Alan Thomas and Harriet Pattison, and all these amazing studies and all these amazing books on it, and also the more books about the experience. I actually didn't had the chance to, or I didn't had the time yet to read the books about Sudbury, just what Peter Gray wrote about it. But actually, like this, I read some works of Summerhill, so of A.S. Nile, but not so much about Sudbury. What would be the difference actually of Sudbury and for example Summerhill in your opinion?
So just to backtrack there a minute, one of the things that I really liked about Daniel Greenberg's writing is that he does he does begin the work of looking at why it works and what's going on. But he's a physicist. And then, Peter Gray does some of that too, but he's an evolutionary psychologist. Whereas in between, I came very close to becoming, I actually did 5 years of psychology before realizing that, again, the direction I was heading in wasn't one I wanted to go in. But I could have become an educational psychologist very easily in a slightly different parallel reality. I really valued what I read from both Gray and Greenberg. But then I had all of this other psychology background sitting there screaming at me, and politics, because I come from, the apartheid era of South Africa and that whole transition. So then I had Carl Rogers in the one ear, shouting about, in my inner psyche, shouting at me about self-actualizing tendencies, and how humans have to become what they have to become, or they just profoundly dissatisfied. And I had Jung shouting in my other ear about synchronicities and the way we find what we need, and then I had Ivan Illich, with deschooling society and looking at the politics of education. And then I had the whole of apartheid education in South Africa, which was explicitly designed to dumb people down and act as a form of propaganda. So there just wasn't any escaping that fact. It was in your face that education was being used like that. So I had all of those other influences, also kind of getting me to see self-directed education maybe from a different angle than the other people that I was reading. Now I've completely lost track because I went sideways there as to what you actually asked me.
But it's very, very interesting, because that is also a very important thing, like the politics of it. that are really, really interesting. And what I also found really intriguing when I got introduced to the idea of free, so the full human rights experience education. So like the angle of the politics behind it and how education is also used by governments, but could be or is actually so much more, because it's a very, very personal thing. And it is, in my opinion, kind of misused politically.
Yes.
Instead of empowering people actually to find out who am I, and trusting also in that if you have people that have this possibility to find out who am I, what are my interests, why I am here, and what do I want to do with my life, without manipulating it so much.
Yes.
That you would get a society that is actually, nice to live in.
Yes.
I would guess so. And my experiencing communities that live that give this possibility of self-directed education, having experienced Summerhill or having experienced unschooling festivals, like how the society, how people interact, confirms for me that belief that it would be of great benefit also for the society as a whole, that we can trust in people. Yes. And especially in young people, I have no doubt in my mind that you can entrust them, and they always are well-meaning, and that the outcome is a positive one. Maybe I sidetracked now too. We are completely lost in our thoughts, but I find that interesting, like this connection with the politics and your background. Of course, that makes a big difference. Where I think it's always like, if you read a book by someone, it's kind of always there is the story of the person writing the book in the writing. It has to be. And it's your point of view that makes it unique, and also the differences of the point of view, as you described. The point of view of Peter Gray was a lot different than the point of view of Daniel Greenberg, or is, of course, different, because their experiences are different. They are different people, and that's so interesting, because then there is something for everybody to find, and you can combine it.
Yes. And that brings us back to what you asked me, which you've now resurrected, which is like the difference between Summerhill, for example, and Sudbury Valley School.
Yes.
But this is also why I love self-directed education so much, because people always say, there's no one thing that will work for everybody. So stop saying that self-directed education will work for everybody. And I just find that so paradoxical, because the irony is that self-directed education is the only thing that I have found that allows people to find what is right for them. It's the one thing that can work for everybody, because it isn't one thing. It's like a whole, self-directed education is an enormous buffet restaurant where you can help yourself from anything, or you can order something specific from the kitchen, or you can take whatever's on the menu, or you can cook for yourself. It's like, it's the one place. This is where I really struggle with people misunderstanding SDE as well. And this is where I like to talk about Summerhill, because Summerhill offers a mainstream curriculum. It offers ordinary classes. It offers a school that is like the other schools in England. But it doesn't coerce that, and it doesn't only offer that. It also allows you to do whatever else you might want to do instead, and treats it as valid. So if you want to spend your time up a tree and not writing essays, that's absolutely fine. And that's still SDE. Whereas very often I think people look at the SDE of Sudbury Valley School, where there's no class unless it's requested. There's no class unless it's set up by the kids, unless they've initiated it. It's kind of the other extreme end of SDE. It's like no offerings, and there's many, many different models in between. For example, I don't have a lot of experience with Agile, but I mean, I have we had, unfortunately, it's now no longer, but we had an agile learning center that I was supporting a few hours drive away. And there, you have active offerings that are made, but again, they are optional. The kids, it's all consent based. So there's this whole range in SDE around how much is offered and how much is completely emergent. And all of that's valid because it's a question of what works for this particular person at this particular time. We've had kids at Riverstone busy doing their Cambridge IGSC things. That's still SDE because they chose it. And it's coming from their own logic, their own reasoning, their own desire as to why they want to do it. We have other kids who would never even consider doing that because it's just really not their personality to sit down with somebody else's curriculum. We have people who need to discover things completely through experiment. We have other people who want to watch a really fun YouTube to learn it. And each of us has different needs over time as to how we want to learn a particular thing or achieve a particular thing. You can't even say I'm this kind of learner or that kind of learner. It's like in this moment, what are my learning needs? And that's really SDE.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing when you get first in contact to wrap your head around, like that you are already doing self-directed education all the time.
Yes, you can't not.
The moment you go into a library, that's also if you just see it as an institutional thing.
Yeah.
Like a library is an SDE learning center.
Yes. I mean, that's where Peter Gray is very, very keen for that to become obvious. And I think it would be fantastic, if every library became an SDE center. But just to backtrack for one more minute, though, what I do see in the Sudbury type model is the primacy of conversation and interaction as the site of learning. It's like Summerhill still puts the classroom at the forefront. It's kind of the most obvious thing. Whereas in the Sudbury model, you really have that community and human interaction, organic human interaction as being probably the most used way to learn. Let's put it that way. Most of it is education by conversation. That's the most dominant form in my experience. Obviously, my experience is small, but yeah.
So it's much closer to actually to make a comparison that I know, like an unschooling festival.
Yes. Yeah.
But just all the time, and you have a community. You have more. But also, like, you find this also like on some festivals that are going on for longer times. You have a community. You have also this organizational thing that is organically developing because it is needed for
yes.
that. You have like circles where you discuss stuff, how to organize stuff, and what do we want? Who should occupy the stage now at what time or whatever.
Yes.
Oh, the most important, cooking.
Of course.
Yeah, that's a big need. And everybody can still do what he or she wants to.
Yeah.
And is free. And you see that it is all very, organically developing. Also, if you hear a need and then there are like 2 or 3 people coming together and say, oh yeah, we want to do this, let's do it together. We are all interested in that. And so to speak, lessons are developing themselves.
Yes. And I love that you've raised that because, historically there's a tension between Sudbury Valley School and unschoolers around, I think, exactly this, in that, and we've seen it as well, for example, when some unschooling families come to have a look at Riverstone and they go, oh, but you've got rules. Ugh. The thing is to realize that, a family also has rules and their own culture and their own structures. It's just that it's more invisible because it's permanent and it's in your family and, you're all part of the same culture. So I really love this analogy that you've drawn there that, an SDE facility is kind of like a permanent unschooling camp. The moment that you're going to go above a certain number of people, above a certain number of hours of interaction, above a certain number of physical resources that need to be conserved or managed, then you're going to have structures for making decisions, for resolving conflict, for making plans. Those are natural parts of the culture, so they're going to emerge. And so, Sudbury Valley School has got structures that they've developed over time. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much those structures developed over time.
Yeah.
And they tend to see it as rigid, but it's not rigid. It's evolving. They've simply found their best practice for them. And it's very, very different to the best practice at Riverstone Village. There's a lot of differences between Riverstone and Sudbury Valley School. Again, because we're a different group of people in a different place with different dynamics. And again, it's evolved over time and it's always evolving.
I think it's kind of the realization that everybody is responsible.
Yes.
Because you are in a community. I find the experience is the strongest when something goes wrong.
Yes.
Like I had these experiences on festivals where conflict came about. And then you realize, but here's something that we need to discuss and we need to find a way to resolve it. Otherwise, this will make it uncomfortable for everybody to be around. And normally it's very simple stuff, but like I remember one simple thing: you are on a festival and you want to go to bed at a certain time, but you sleep like 20 meters away from the stage.
Good luck.
So that is a problem. And then you need to find out, we need to find a compromise here. So either you move further away from the stage, because of course people want to have fun and make music also like a little bit later at night. And of course, on the other side, people can also make a compromise and say, we can stop at 11. That's okay for us.
Yeah.
So, and then you have a rule, and it came about just because that's the need. And on the next festival, maybe nobody has a problem, so you don't need that rule. So that rule doesn't exist. It doesn't need. We are so used that, like in conventional schooling, you would have rules and they stay the same.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Because they are already established. You come into that building and the rules are already established. And I think that's a big thing to realize, that if you come to a place like that, maybe there are a lot of rules, but next year or maybe next month or next week, these rules can change because now you are also there.
Yes.
And you have different needs. And then maybe we have to reevaluate some of the rules, how we are living together. And I find this also interesting to think about if we could like extend this to our normal lives, because we live in a we are governed in a way where we have like rules that are 200 years old or 100 years old, but they are from the past.
Yes.
And they are maybe not fitting anymore, but they are very difficult to change. And that's a big difference. Like in a community where everybody realized we are responsible for our lives and for the functioning of the community, that gets much more flexible in my opinion and in my experience.
Yeah. And it's also a question of who gets to make the rules and for whose benefit. And I think that that's something that I'm very, very aware of, having grown up under apartheid. Again, it was really in your face that it was a very small group of people who were making the rules only for their own convenience at the expense of everybody else. And that's actually the norm in our cultures. It's just not always so blatant. And so I think that's where, again, if you look at self-directed education and the optimizing condition of being able to play with the tools of the culture, it's critically important that young people get the opportunity to play with rule-making and structuring, because this is one of the most powerful political tools of the culture. So they need to get their hands on it. And get to know their way around it. Otherwise, they're just going to grow up as, passive recipients of all this rulemaking. Most of us behave like victims in relation to rulemaking. We just have to suck it up. So I think that, our kids really need to have this opportunity, those who are interested, to grapple with this I really look forward to seeing what the world looks like when the majority of kids have grown up making and changing the rules and knowing that these things can be molded for mutual benefits. I can't wait to see what the world looks like once we get there.
I would guess at least the discussion around it would be much more rational. And like one thing I observe a lot is there are a lot of in more mainstream schooling environments, there are a lot of things where people invented already problems and then decided, okay, we have to protect people that this will not happen. But oftentimes exactly what you're trying to, how do you say it in English? Verhindern. Prevent. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what you're trying to prevent is then actually produced as a result. For example, one big example is mobbing. In my experience, schools are a breeding ground for mobbing because everything is designed that you make the experience that it is okay to mob people in a way.
Well, the system is doing it.
Yeah. It's already like you are forced. So it's okay to force people to do something that they clearly don't want to do.
It's like the parents saying, "Don't hit your sister,"
Yeah, then hitting. Yeah, or like also like stuff in our all day life, like using a knife.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, a knife is dangerous, but if you are never allowed to touch a knife.
Yeah, one of my first ahas around that was actually, again, a different unschooling family that I encountered when my son was quite young. And this mom had handed her 3-year-old a really sharp kitchen knife. And the 3-year-old was chopping carrots with a really sharp kitchen knife. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And she said to me, the secret is you have to give them a sharp one because it's the blunt ones that will hurt them because they can't control them properly.
And that's true.
Okay. And what's going to happen if she cuts her finger? What's the absolute worst that can happen to a 3-year-old with a sharp knife chopping carrots? She can go to the emergency ward to have a couple of stitches. She's not even going to manage to amputate her finger. You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is a learning experience we can actually afford. And then she's going to know a lot about sharp knives. But I actually never saw that child bleed.
No. Yeah, that's also my experience that it is the other way around. And I like doing this at festivals, like cooking with young people. I like cooking with them together, so they help me. And what they like the most is chopping up vegetables. Mm-hmm. So I had one story where there was a teenager. I think she was like 16 years old. Wow. She never chopped up vegetables. It was not in an unschooling or self-directed. It was very free, but we just cooked. It was like a workshop, and we cooked together. Mm. And she was so happy that she could cut paprika and carrots. And she was like, "Wow, I never did this before." And and the 3-year-old is perfectly capable.
Yeah. That's amazing.
It's not that you leave them alone with the knife. It's not that you are not there to help them if they need help, or that you do whatever you want. Yeah. That's the other misconception that people associate, I think, a lot with self-directed education or unschooling or whatever, how you want to call it. That there are no rules and they can do whatever they want. But this is actually not the case.
Yeah. This is also where I really do appreciate, Peter Gray's work on this in terms of really articulating those optimizing conditions, because I often share that with people when they just start unschooling. And I say, okay, so there's actually this list of optimizing conditions, and it's really useful. Why don't you have a look at it and think about how you are going to provide what's on that list? Because if you're not providing what's on that list, then maybe you are being a bit lazy, or you have the opportunity to slide into neglect without realizing it. And one of those optimizing conditions is lots of access to a variety of adults, caring adults, who are helpers and not judges. And I think that that's the mistake people make. We're so used to the schooled idea that an adult is kind of a judge and a director, that they think that an optimizing condition is that children have to have the guidance of a judging director to tell them when they are right and when they are wrong and how to do things. And we do need access to adults who can assist us. It's just that they need to be in a different role, not in that judging, guiding, I will tell you the way to go kind of role. But kids absolutely do need wisdom and support and, to be able to have a sounding board and somebody to consult. That's very, very important for self-directed education.
And it is this trusting relation.
Yes, a safe relationship.
Yeah. It's such a big difference if I'm lecturing a young child about, hey, this knife is sharp, and telling them already what will happen. You will cut yourself, and then you will bleed, and then this is this is all making prophecies. But you could also be there like, yeah, but I'm very careful with a knife, and they are very good observers. Yeah, they are immersed, But for that to happen is like, I think like one big roadblock is that we as adults have also to be freed, to have the time to go into relationship. I just, 2 days ago, I heard a very good interview where the person said like, yeah, but we ourselves as adults were kind of neglected having all these relationships. And so it makes it more difficult for us as adults to provide these relationships to young people, to our children, because we ourselves didn't make the experience. So it is also kind of having the patience with yourself and to say like, yeah, but okay, let's take a step back. And I have also to learn to trust myself. If I don't trust myself, of course, I cannot trust young people. And I think that's a big roadblock for a lot of...
Definitely.
And I see this a lot in teachers that really believe that they have to control young people all the time. And I was always amazed when I still worked as a teacher that... Of all their talks of having problems with discipline in their classes, and I didn't experience in my classes, and that was like I was always wondering like, why is that, and what is the difference? And now I kind of know better, and I understand better what probably was the main difference, and it was like I naturally trusted. Even before I had an idea about self-directed education and had a theoretical background behind it, that you can trust young people. And if you don't trust them, they know that you don't trust them. So they believe that they cannot be trusted.
Which brings us actually back to the reading question, doesn't it? Because, if there's one thing that we are led to believe, it is that reading has to be taught. The earlier, the better. And, I think, again, as you're saying, as with discipline, when an environment is set up in a certain way that it's likely to create discipline problems, then you're going to get lots of evidence for the fact that you have to control young people, because otherwise there will be discipline problems. And I think in the same way, when an environment is set up to put reading in a certain position there, you're going to be able to then get evidence for the fact that you better teach reading, teach it thoroughly, and teach it young. And so we've got this really interesting situation where now we believe that we have to get 3-year-olds learning their ABCs and 4-year-olds writing words. Otherwise, they're going to be in trouble at the age of 8 and 12. And we're really creating a tragedy right now.
Yeah. And that's really like, to come to the book you wrote, like, what if school creates dyslexia? I think like even maybe in the title, this is not only interesting for people that are diagnosed with dyslexia. This is like a general thing that, as you said, we this like through the distrust there's a situation created where you hinder the natural learning process of reading. When I'm looking back at reading lessons in school, that was horrible. And I was a very good reader, so I liked reading in my spare time. So I don't have the feeling that I actually learned reading in school, but school did a lot to convince me that reading is really hard and really boring, and that's I really got a dislike when there was like, oh, we are reading a book together. I was like horrified. It's like, oh no, please, let's not read a book together, because this is a pain. I finished the book when we read one page, and I was finished with the book. So for me, it was like too slow, and for others, it was too fast. And the idea that everybody should like have the same pace is completely crazy.
Yes,
I would say. And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the idea. What if school creates dyslexia? What is the premise behind it?
So I'm going to go sideways again, because that's how this conversation's going, because that's also very SDE. Because what's just come to mind is actually Lego. Can you imagine anything more fun for a kid than just playing with Lego, right? So we've got a science museum here in Joburg. It's quite an awesome science museum. But every now and again, they used to have like an event where they would run certain sessions that any kids could sign up for. So I and another unschooling friend, we saw they had a Lego build a car session. And we're like, oh, our boys are going to love this. They love Lego. Let's sign them up for this session. And we took them. And the way they ran the session is that they had some desks in rows in the room. And they had little Ziploc packets of the Lego pieces that each child needed. And they distributed the Lego pieces onto each desk. And the kids sat at this desk with their little Ziploc packet. And then they had a projector screen up at the front, and the instructor up at the front said, okay, now everybody find the piece that looks like this. And then they all waited until everybody in the room had found the piece that looks like this. Now find the piece that looks like this. Now join them here. And then they had to go around the room to try and help all the kids who had joined it on the wrong clipping like space. The kids hated that Lego session so much. And, you know, our kids already knew and loved Lego. They survived. I can only imagine what happened to the kids who were doing Lego for the first time ever that day.
Yeah, for them the experience is Lego is crap. It's boring. It's boring as hell, and I never want to build Lego never again. It takes
an hour and a half to build what my kid would do on his own in 10 minutes flat, and he would have more fun doing it because he would do what he wanted to do instead of what he was being made to do. So, you know, I really see...
And it is also like building stuff when you are not yet ready.
Yes. So they had to help some of the kids to join those two pieces. Now, I've seen little kids or kids who are new to Lego, you know, sometimes all they do is clip a whole lot of squares together in a tower. And they really have fun clipping all those squares together in a tower. So to make somebody's first experience have to be to build this little car, you know, that's daunting for the kid who just wants to clip the things together in a tower and discover that. And it's boring for the kid who already can make a car like 5 times fancier than that one. So the moment that you are standardizing this learning experience, any learning experience, the fact that you're standardizing it means that you are going to ruin the experience for the majority of kids in the room. You're going to just have to be really lucky to hit the exact developmental level of that one kid who's actually where your lesson plan is at.
It is really interesting that you give the example of building Lego. Like imagine if we would like put this into a curriculum.
Yes.
And if for example you were never interested in building Lego until 13.
Would it be a problem?
Then will it be a problem? No, of course not. And do you have to be interested in building Lego with 3? No. Why?
Yeah. So we created this thing called a curriculum that gets delivered by these things called textbooks. that are written, and the kids are required to read them. And only because of that, only because we've done that, do we then need the kids to be able to read by 6, because otherwise they can't do everything else we planned for them. And I think the problem is that we take so much for granted that is how learning has to be done. Learning has to be done through the written word. Because we impose that, we then have to so-called impose the early reading, because otherwise they can't access the rest of what we prepared for them. So it's not just about looking at reading instruction and how reading instruction is done and whether it's done too soon and whether it's done in the wrong way. It's looking at the whole context that makes us create this artificial emphasis on reading instruction, because it's unimaginable to most people right now who are alive in this time right now. Most of the people cannot imagine what does an education look like when it doesn't depend on a text book. And that's been the most amazing thing for me, is watching kids get amazing amounts of education. Again, as I say, primarily through conversation, also through hands-on experience. And in this day and age, through amazing, audio, visual, audio books, videos. But there is so much that they learn without having to read. And then, of course, what we see in SDE, which was for me the mind-blowing thing that got me to write this book, is that we don't see a reading problem. So, conventional logic would say, okay, if the kids don't have to learn to read in order to learn, they won't learn to read. We're going to end up with kids who can't read. And exactly the opposite is true. SDE is the only learning system that I have managed to find that doesn't have any illiteracy at the end. There's no functional illiterate who comes through from SDE. It's just a question of when they learn. But they all end up fluent readers. Even the ones that we can spot in other ways have the dyslexic neurology. So there's a bit of disagreement with me around this. Greenberg and Gray are not convinced that there is a dyslexic neurology. I live in a family of dyslexics, and I believe there's a dyslexic neurology. And I even noticed the other day that I've got a note up on I'm looking at it right now, up on my pin board, something that I wrote for myself a few years ago before I even started looking at this. Without thinking of myself as dyslexic at the time, I've written the word hearing, and it's written with a D at the end instead of G, hearing, because that G is flipped upside down and backwards in my handwriting. And it took me 2 years more than that to notice that I even did that. I just never had the reading problem because I was already reading when I got to school. So I do think that there is a dyslexic neurology, but it doesn't have to involve a reading difficulty. And the reading difficulty seems to come from the pressure and the stress, sometimes of having the wrong method given to learn to read, also from it happening before they are ready, from being in an environment that doesn't feel safe and relaxing, from trying too hard, because the dyslexic mind is very, very good at certain kinds of very complex processing. And if you over-process a two-dimensional text, then you're going to have problems, keeping it still. So, for me, it's so important to get this book out there because I hate unnecessary tragedy. The world is hard enough as it is. Life is hard enough as it is. But when you have somebody trying their hardest to do something they really want to do and getting the opposite result than what they are trying to do because of something completely preventable, for me, that's tragedy. And I see that in two groups of people. I see that in dyslexic kids trying to read through school methods. They're trying their hardest to achieve this thing they want to achieve, and they're getting the opposite result, and reading is becoming more and more difficult. And I see it in a second group of people, the people who are trying to help them are trying their hardest to help these kids with such goodness in their hearts, trying so hard to help these kids learn to read and getting the opposite effect. How can we possibly say that we have functional illiteracy coming out the other end when remedial education has been applied? How is that possible? So this tragedy needs to be prevented.
Yeah, and I think your book could be like a a great contributor to change how we think about it. Because if you change the perspective on how we are learning to read, it makes such a difference. I had a personal experience of learning to read in my professional experience. So being or I was a music teacher, and in music schools, at least in Luxembourg, the most important thing, like in schools, is that everything is built on that you are able to read So able to read music sheets. And this is that takes a lot of time if you start out learning an instrument and you have to read music sheets. So until you come to actually playing and discovering your instrument, you are spending a lot of time, you are wasting a lot of time. So I came across the study that Harriet Pattison and Alan Thomas did about reading, rethinking how to learn to read, that they did with unschoolers. And where the conclusion was but it's completely normal that you start reading with 12, 13, that's no problem at all. Also, coming to the conclusion that, but unschoolers seem to have not so much a problem with learning to read. They just do it at their pace. So also this switch of perspective. So I decided I will do an experiment. I will stop wasting my time teaching them learning to read music sheets. And actually the result was that my students were better readers after I stopped teaching it. So I made the experience in my professional work. The moment I stopped, it was much easier. I was still in a thinking of I have to manipulate my room and everything to that they see that is a tool of the culture, that they are in contact with it, and that was there. But I don't think that was the main factor that played into why later on I discovered, but now it went much quicker. The process of learning to read music was much more about exploration. And building Legos. I had some students where I even worked with Legos to explain the concept of rhythm, how this is, because it's a mathematical concept, and it's the same in Legos. You build with Legos, and then we went also the other way around. Instead of learning to read because I want to read the music sheet, we learned to use the tools of this language to compose.
Yes. To write down your music.
So, and for some, that was the right way to do it, because they wanted to compose, and they were, wow, this is what I composed, and now I can translate this on my instrument, and I can kind of. So they had a hands-on experience. Why am I even doing this? And it was not because the music school wants me to.
Yes, that's lovely. And interestingly, how many kids I've watched now doing that with writing and reading, actually wanting to write, not particularly interested in reading, but wanting to write, wanting to put their own thoughts down on paper, and reading coming that way around. And the delight they have in playing with spelling and inventing spelling and creating spelling, and how at some point that naturally progresses into wanting to know how to spell it so that everyone else can read it, because after a while they realize it's only people like Jana who can read it, because I can read anybody's spelling. So, that journey of discovery. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's also interesting, like that you also can play with spelling.
Yes, it's fun.
That young people and also adults, that people like to play with words, but to do that you have to be allowed to misspell words, and oftentimes the humor comes also by accident, because you are trying to write something and then you find out, but it, you spell it, it says something completely different, or you can interpret it in a completely different way, and this can create funny situations. And in that way, it is not something this is wrong, I have to underline. No, the result was something unexpected. And I think like finding stuff that is unexpected makes it that much more interesting.
And this is where, one of the things that I deal with, that you've read in that first book of mine is about the learning cycle. That the most common way that we progress is we start out by not knowing that there's something to know. We don't even realize that we don't know something. So we think we know everything there is to know. And then we move from there into discovering that there's something we don't know. Discovering that there's a gap in our knowledge, there's something we don't understand. And the critical thing over there is that there's two different possibilities at that step. The one possibility is curiosity. We go, there's something I don't know. There's something I can find out here. I'm curious. But the other possibility is shame. There's something I don't know. I'm not good enough. I have a gap. I am deficient. And those are the two possibilities at that step. And the problem is that the moment that we are feeling pressure, we are being judged, we're being marked, we're being graded, we're being made to stand in front of the class, we have this expectation that people who are good enough can do this, then we are really pushing people towards the shame part of that. And that's not going to lead you forward into learning. That's going to lead you into shutting down, into denying that there's a problem, into trying to pretend that you know, into cheating so that it looks like you know, into saying that it's not worth learning, so you won't put in an effort because I don't care about that kind of defensiveness. Everything there is actually going against the possibility that you're actually going to learn. Whereas the moment that you're in play mode is exactly what will take you into, hey, this is fun. We can play with it. We can experiment with it. We can see where it goes. We can be curious. We can just see what happens. And this is where I think the difference between self-directed education and, the current method that is most common in mainstream schools are at such odds, because the way that schools are currently set up is almost guaranteed to push you into shame every time you don't know something or haven't. Look at how they mark things wrong. They constantly correct you. You're not allowed to experiment at all. It's all about getting it right. And the people who are rewarded are the ones who get it right the quickest. No, there's only one right answer. So, it's soul destroying.
That is the thing, like what Sir Ken Robinson was talking about all the time, like creative thinking is destroyed. Because there is not only one answer. There are so many answers. And also, why are you doing something? Like another example, it's not something like, now you have to get a grade, because that's the same. Like also we correct and then we applaud if you do something as we wanted it, as we expected it. So that's kind of the same. I don't have to applaud all the time that, C. Okay, yeah, the letter C, applause. And now you get a star. That's also not really helpful. And it's well meant, but it's, in my experience, kind of the same.
So there's a lot of assumptions about what has to come before what, which people assume are universal, but they're just really not. Your foundation might not be my foundation. I've seen many, many kids grasp the concept of reading and start to read certain words before they have their whole alphabet. They might not have any idea what Q is. Yeah. Q is one of the later ones to come because we hardly ever use it. Why do you need to know Q before you can write the word love? And it's interesting to me how many SDE kids start with the word love because their most common experience writing to people is to write the person's name, love, and their own name in cards and greetings and things like that. And it's a wonderful first word compared to the, what is the in my life? I can live without it.
Is the first word not generally apple because it's A?
And apple, let's talk about, cross-cultural interactions. Many people don't even have an apple. It amazes me how we still teaching all these city kids, the cow goes moo is really, really important. The pig goes oink. It's like, these are life skills, right? Yeah, but mine corrected me very quickly. They were like, pigs do not go oink, they go. How do you spell?
And that's the experience. Like I live quite on where you have a lot of animals around you, and they know how they actually do. And it's also confusing because the frogs make quack and the duck makes quack. So in German, at least. I don't know. How does it do in English? Because then it's even different.
Yeah, in English it's quack. But my daughter had a duck for a pet, and she pointed out to me that it actually says whap. It doesn't actually say quack. It says whap, 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 whap.
Yeah, that's much closer to a duck. But it's absurd. It's true. It's like we talked a lot. It's a long talk, and it was really enjoyable. And I liked really to hear how you came to what you are doing today and the way of thinking about it, and also the background of thinking coming from a rights perspective, like but these are with the rights of young children, and you work with the environment and everything. And in the end, I think like self-directed education is really like universal, and it is in all our lives, not just in schooling or like in our education in a sense, but it's like more about a lifestyle and the perspective on how we go about making experiences. And that's one also like a big difference, that it is more about experience than a methodology, like a method.
Well, I think it's also, it depends on what we believe education is for. And I think most people just don't maybe realize that, the main reason to have standardized schooling isn't for the benefit of the individual, it's for the benefit of the state. Even today, if you go to speak to, people who are in control of state education, many of them will still be honest enough to say in so many words, we are trying to create the standard citizen. And that's really who it's for. And I think we're at a point in history where we have to really wake up and question whether that's in our best interests or the best interests of our children, for somebody who is in a government bureaucratic position to decide what is the ideal citizen, according to whose best interests is that going to be. So I think it's also just time to really wake up to that, because we don't have very much time left in our history where we will have any choice. We're already living in a situation where technology is making microcontrol very, very easy for governments. And this is sort of our last chance to decide whether governments are going to be able to continue to decide who we should be, or whether we actually want to keep the natural ecology of human diversity alive. Because I think we can see from nature, again, one of my other influences that I didn't mention is eco-psychology and the work of people like Gregory Bateson, where you really realize that ecosystems are wise because of their diversity. That's what makes them strong. The moment that you have one ecosystem become all too much one thing, that's when you have ecological crash. And I think the same goes for human social systems. If you have too much of the standard citizen, is life still worth living anymore? Yeah, we need to actually celebrate the fact that we have so much human variation and educate in a way that supports that instead of crushing it.
And I think this is the perfect final word. Thank you for this conversation, Jana. I'm happy the next episode will be the first part of your book as an audiobook sample, so people can listen to it. And if you really want to find out more about Jana's works, about her books, I will put the link to your homepage in the description. It's janaclements.com.